Rotary, call me the Duc Man, home port, Chincoteague Island, Virginia. Been here pretty much all my life, close to it. I've been carving 52 years, the old style way with a hatchet. Go from the bandsaw to the hatchet, chopping them out. When I was 15 years old, I was pretty much raised by a very well-known carver, Duc Jr. I went over one day and introduced myself. Well, I introduced myself, they tell me around 4 years old. Don't remember that part of it too much. Doug was a waterman, like his father was, and a decoy carver. And he had a little chopping block out in the backyard, and he was chopping away at this block of wood, just like that. And I said, "Cat, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm making a duck stool, a decoy to hunt with." And I said, "What do you mean you're making it?" He said, "I'm using a hatchet and a block of wood, and I'm going to make a head and glue it together and put a balance weight on it, and I'm going to hunt ducks with it." And I said, "Well, you can go down to the hardware store and buy them for $1.50 a piece out of plastic." And he said, "Boy, it just ain't the same thing." So I watched him, and I kept watching him and watching him. And I was 15 years old. I'll never forget it. He cut me out some little miniatures about 3 inches long, a little scroll saw, a little bandsaw he had there. And he said, "Take these home and make them." And I said, "Well, how do you make them?" He gives me a knife, and he says, "You cut away everything that doesn't look like a duck." And he laughed about it. He was a gentle giant. Wasn't a real big guy, but he had arms like Arnold Schwarzenegger from working on the water all his life. Hard as a rock, big barrel laugh. So I took it home and I made these little miniatures up. And next thing you knew, I was selling them. I was selling them in a restaurant in the glass case where you check out. And I told the owner, I said, "Can I sell these little birds in your glass case?" He said, "How much you get for them?" I said, "I get $2 a piece. But if you let me sell them in here, I'll give you a quarter on each one. I'll bump them up to $2.25. This was about 1968. So he laughed and he put them in his little glass case, and at the end of the week, I'd go there and he'd have me $8, $9, $10. Well, I was in '68, I was just about rich. $5 a week for allowance, $10 worth of ducks. Man, I couldn't have it any better. So I just kept carving and never thought it would turn out to be what it is now, today. I've been carving 52 years. I carved all through high school. I went to Navy boot camp. I went to A school, carved in A school. I went down to submarine, I carved on a sub. Well, I tried to. I never realized how dark it was going to be on a sub. So that didn't pan out too good. Carved my whole Navy days, my whole 4 years. Came out and went to work for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, tracking satellites. I had some electronics training, so that kind of helped me. And I stayed there about 4.5 years. Didn't like it. I just didn't like working for somebody else. So I came home, I said, "Honey, I'm going to quit my job. And I'm going to carve ducks for a living." We just built a brand new house, had 2 kids. She said, "If you do, I'm going to leave you," which meant if I quit, she was going to leave me. Well, the book, I was written up by a very well-known carver named William Veazey, world-class carver, instructor. He did a book on me, or put me in his book back in the 80s. And one of the chapters in the book said, "I did and she didn't," which meant I quit, but she didn't leave me. Thank God. So I came out here, and in 9.5 years, I made 5,751 pieces. I had to write every one of them down so I could show her that I could make a living carving ducks. I learned from people like Duc Jr., Cigar Daisy, Delbert Cigar Daisy. He was a master. Bobby Umflett, good old buddy of mine. Back then, nobody taught anything about carving. They would they would learn you. You would, because when you got done washing them and talking to them, they'd say, "Did you learn anything?" They weren't there to teach. They didn't want to. These old timers didn't want to sit back and have a young'un running around their feet all day long. If you've ever seen the movie Misty, which made Chincoteague famous, it was filmed with a guy named Miles Hancock as the old carver, and Paul and Maureen Beebe wanted to make some extra money to buy a house, so they went to Mr. Miles and he put him to work cleaning up shavings and stuff. But he didn't really, you know, it gave you a good essence of what an old-time carver looked like and how they acted. So I'd go to a lot of old carvers like Mr. Miles, and I'd watch them. But if I'd say, "Teach me something," he'd say, "Boy, I ain't got time for that mess. But you can watch me and learn something." Well, if you wanted to learn it, you sat there with your mouth shut and your eyes and ears open, and you learned something. And I guess I learned too damn much, because I watched him do this with a hatchet. It's a very dangerous tool. I do not teach this at all. You can watch me. I'll tell you anything about it. But I'm not going to send you home to chop your fingers off. I haven't chopped them off yet. With a knife. Ain't nothing to it. So from there, I go to this little contraption here. Mr. Miles Hancock had one of these in his shop. I never noticed it, never remember seeing him use it. But my God, it's a lifesaver. You go from this point of the knife to this point, just like you would a knife. When I'm carving it, this is where you want to carve. You never push the blade through it. That's how you carve. So instead of using this, they make them with two hands, and I can pretty much just let my thumb guide it along. And you can actually take a lot of wood off with this thing. As far as making a certain hour to teach you how to carve, to learn you something, no. Those days are done. I don't punch a clock no more. I used to come out here about 8 o'clock. Then it went to 8:30. Then 9, 9:30. Now, if I don't feel like coming out here at all, I don't come out at all. Now, that's one half of the bird done. And that's the way the back half will be. I'll mash him up with a hand-carved head. That'll be a red-breasted merganser when he's done. When I get done with this draw knife, I'll put it on the bandsaw, and I'll run it across the bandsaw. Nothing up my sleeve, wrong bird. But I'll run it across the bandsaw, and I'll slice off about 3/4 of an inch off the bottom. Flip that off, draw a line in here, go to my drill press. I use an 1.25" German Forstner bit. Lay it down, and I bring that down, and I hollow the whole thing out. You hollow them out for 2 reasons. This is air-dried wood. This is called cottonwood, Polonia. It's got water in it. It doesn't have sap. A lot of woods like pine, cedar, they do have sap. I can't get it kiln dried, I get it air dried. When I make the bird, I hollow it out. I want all the moisture out of the wood. If you seal that bird, that wood with paint, you're going to seal it, and it's got moisture in it. That moisture is going to try to come out someday. So you're going to have little cracks, checks, sap. So you hollow it out. I put a penny or a screw or a washer. I put something inside of it to show people that it is hollowed out. The first reason, again, being to make sure it's dry. The second reason, when I put the head on it, this will be a surf scooter. And when I glue that head on, when I throw it out in the water at 4 or 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, when it hits upside down, I'm going to attach a bar weight, a lead bar weight to it, And it's going to be light enough so the counterbalance is going to flip it over. You want more weight below the water than you do above the water. If you've been on a sailboat, you want your sailboat to ride this way, not that way. So you put a lead bar on them, on the bottom of it. You can put a keel on it. This is actually a piece of cork, a cork bird. I put a keel on it and a lead weight. On this bird, I like the big cork birds, I like to put a keel on them. It does make them float good, but also you got a handle. When you wrap the string back around it, it's a pretty heavy bird. This is called a shelf, where you put the neck on. And this would be what they call an ice groove down the back. Normally, if it was raining and freezing, and it gets water in the back, it turns to ice. So the old timers used to make what they call an ice groove down the back. So I'll chisel that out. And again, you can use grinding tools, what they call a forging tool, to do all this, but that's not the way I was taught. I was taught with a hand knife, and that's what I'm going to use till the day I die. I haven't started just grinding yet, but there's nothing wrong with it. Some people are better at using a machine tool, a grinder, than other people. They feel more comfortable with it. This is why the apron is all cut up. You're supposed to hit the apron and not the skin. It worked out pretty good so far. This is one of my favorite birds. It's a ringneck. I'm kind of getting known now for making birds with motion in a swimming position. When you put that bird out in the water, you've got that head. He's pushing water. He's got his head cocked a little bit. He's kind of going through the water, and it just gives him some motion to him. I'm trying to make like one of every species. That way, this is what they call a gadwall. It's a puddle duck. That was a diving duck, the ringneck. They feed in deeper water. The little puddle ducks, they tip up when they eat. I've only made about a half a dozen of these gadwalls. But these do go in the water. Everything you see in the shop gets hunted over. First wooden brand I ever did. He ain't that pretty, but he's mine. Some people say that about their youngins. He ain't pretty to look at, but he's mine. This bird floated behind my house. We had 4 feet of water all over the island. That bird floated behind my house during the storm. And Doug Jester Sr. made it. And after the tide went down, made out of an old Navy life raft, old balsa wood. After the tide went down, I was 9 years old. Doug come up to my house. I said, Doug, all these duck stools have been floating by from people's sheds and stuff that washed away. He said, when the tide goes down, we'll go out in the woods and we'll find some. And we found that bird in 1962. And his dad made it. So I've kept it ever since. Yeah, he's a very, very good friend. Again, we were talking about my mentors, some of the early carvers of Chincoteague who really inspired me. And I'd really be remiss if I hadn't brought some of these out of the house to show you some of the talent these gentlemen had. Mr. Miles Hancock made his Canada Goose probably back in the 50s. Not a really fancy bird at all, but something that he used for his market hunting days. This was a working tool where he would go out and shoot hundreds of ducks and ship them put them on the railway and ship them to the city to make money. Ira Hudson, really early bluebill here. Again, making one of these birds in probably half a day. But Ira Hudson birds now are bringing upwards of $20, $40, $50, $60,000 a piece. These were working tools. These were made to actually bring the bird in. They went to work in the morning and they shot the ducks and they brought them home. If they broke the heads off them, they threw them in the corner. Now today, they were paying 50 cents a piece back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and now they're really a collectible item. Delbert Cigar Daisy. This is probably late 60s, early 70s. I probably spent more time with what they call Cigar Daisy than anybody. I just acquired this bird at auction a week ago. A nice little bird, nothing fancy again, but when Sig did it, that was his rendition of a bufflehead, and it did the job. Last of all, but not least, Doug Jester. Little hen bufflehead, half of a horseshoe for a weight. These birds, they put anything on them. When they threw them in the water upside down, they wanted to make sure they flipped over and did the job. His son is the gentleman that taught me to carve. He took me under his wing back in the 60s, and because of Doug Jester Jr., I became a carver. Found this bird after the 1962 flood. March storm here on Chincoteague. Had it ever since. That's about some of the main people to carve. One other, Dave Umbrella Watson, was a very famous carver here down the shore, Northampton County. Cobb Island. Birds bringing $80, $90, $100,000. Just everyone individually made how they thought the bird looked. And nobody ever thought they would go from a working decoy to a piece of art, a collectible bird, collectible item.